My presentation, my title is The Dialogue Between the Foreigner and the National in the Brazilian Urban Space. The importance of circulation around the globe of men, objects, and images, as well as ideas and ideologies disseminated through the written word, was pointed already in the 18th century by travel and guidebooks writers such as Guy Boucher de la Richarderie in his project for a Bibliothèque Universelle des Voyages in 1988. In the common European-centered vision of the period, La Richarderie stressed the instructive character of the travels. Another powerful example of the circulation flow is this impressive engraving done by Johann Moritz Rugendas. The engraver and painter was in Brazil between 1821 and 25, first hired by Baron of Langsdorff scientific expedition in the country, and still young was moved by the slavery system that he denounced in his book Voyage Pittoresque dans le Brésil, published in Paris and part of the CCEA collection. A more profound analysis of the dynamic of dislocation, displacement, or migration on the cultural process since ancient times were first recognized by anthropologists and sociologists between the second half of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries. Scholars distant by decades as Adolphe Bastien, Edward Thaler, and Marcel Mauss were concerned with the constitution and development of civilizations and the relation forged within and between them. They were followed by architecture and art historians from Viollet-le-Duc to Henri Faucillon, who discussed the same relations in the development of forms in architecture and arts, in time and space, in a diachronic and synchronic perspective. In particular, in his text Les Civilisations, Éléments et Forts, written in 1929, Marcel Mauss recovered Adolphe Bastien's concept of Wandlung, meaning the transformation of a civilization through migrations, the borrowing of cultural elements, and the assimilation between the people who carry these same elements. Mauss also identified the social phenomena that are apt to travel and surpass the limits of a particular society, like, for example, all the techniques, the arts, including music and drama, the religious, moral, and scientific ideas, as well as institutions and principles of social organization or the communication devices that for him, writing in 1929, were transforming the international relations in the contemporaneous exclusive communicational space. In his text, Mauss also recognized the importance of the social agents who carried on the exchanges like the transnational communities formed by dispersed peoples. He suggested that the identity of each social entity, an individual, a clan, a class, a nation, or a civilization, is a function of its exchanges with other social entities, in a way that these distinctive levels constitute an hypersocial system of social systems. In this sense, the French anthropologists define a civilization phenomenon known as the one which extends itself on a wider mass of population, on a wider surface extension, larger than the political geography of each society or nation, having its sources rooted in the past and history of more than one nation as an ensemble sufficiently large and characteristic to disclose and stimulate to the spirit the idea of a family of societies formed by present and historical facts, as well as linguistic, archaeological, and anthropological ones, suggesting historical and geographical connections between the same societies. Therefore, from within the corpus of the ethnographical and anthropological studies developed since the second half of the 19th century, Marcel Mauss suggested that the civilization phenomena are essentially international, extranational, and I quote, "It is on a bedrock of international phenomena that the societies detach themselves. It's on a bedrock of civilizations that the societies stand out, create their idiosyncrasies and individual character." I'm sorry to begin in a harsh way with the most formulations, but if you have to address the dialogue which took place between the foreigner and the national in the Brazilian space during the period of cultural unrest under the authoritarian and nationalistic bias that permeate the cultural initiatives of the Estado Novo, the dictatorship of Getúlio Vargas between the 30s and 50s, we need to contemplate the distinct context between the two sides of the Atlantic and the two hemispheres created by the Ecuador line, including the distinctive theoretical developments and the way some key concepts such as civilization or nation plus the idea of modernity were used in each one of these spaces. In the United States, the studies on immigration and the acknowledgement of its impact not only in forging an American cultural identity, but also on urban sociology and urban environment, may be identified still in the beginning of the 20th century in works such as Edward Steiner's On the Trail of the Immigrant, or in researches that emerged between the 20s and 30s inside the Chicago School of Sociology, led by Robert Park, Ernest Burgess, and Louis Wirth, who had translated and published George Simmels' The Stranger, still in 21. And we need to point as well, okay, the battle fronts for public housing in the 30s engaging many activists from the immigrant milieu and magazines like T-Square and Shelter, edited by Maxwell Levinson, whose archives are part of the CCA collection. We may consider that these magazines were also responding to Le Corbusier intuitions in the 30s, when the French architect considered the contemporary dislocation waves driven by political persecution as a turning point in the direction of original architecture and urban experiences in a renewed Marquinist society. In the opposite directions of Mauss' elaboration or the American initiatives of the same period, in Brazil, the body of intellectuals who defined the cultural perspective of the Estado Novo in the 30s idealized a fictive ethnicity, and then using Etienne Balibar's expression, founded on race and language as the main manifestation of a national character, expressed by the binomial nationalism and modernity. And this is an image taken from a magazine in the 30s of the Brazilian modern intellectuals that was together around our dictatorship, Getúlio Vargas. And defined the cultural perspective in the 30s. That I will call a fictive ethnicity using Etienne Balibar's expression. This fictive ethnicity idealized by the Brazilian intellectuals in those years was founded on race and language as the main manifestation of a national character. Is expressed by the binomial nationalism and modernism, the image that disappeared. But this one works. And this is architect Lúcio Costa, that you may know, the responsible for the Brazilian plan. Architect Lúcio Costa, the future Brazilian planner, joined the group of intellectuals around Getúlio Vargas soon after the coup d'etat and operated the fictive ethnicity in the construction of the historiographical narrative of Brazilian architecture, of which he was the main proposer. While the issue of race was stressing the original bedrock made up of Portuguese, Africans, and the indigenous element as a natural community which maintained its continuity despite later waves of European and Oriental immigrants. The strategy adopted to legitimate as a Brazilian language the works of the early Portuguese settlers during the colonial period was considering that padradic conquête the colonist was in fact at home, and when speaking Portuguese or giving forms to his building, he was not imitating anyone, but working with his own language. In this sense, Lúcio Costa, in tone with other Brazilian nationalist intellectuals, identified the Portuguese architecture culture as the first and only source of Brazilian architecture, and pointed the emergence of a national character during the second half of the 18th century in Minas Gerais, from whence the first ideas of colonial independence had spread. Therefore, it is understandable that the main subject of the researches and preservation initiatives within the National Bureau of Historical and Artistic Heritage Service, led by Rodrigo Melo Franco and Lúcio Costa, were dedicated since its beginning in 37 till the 80s to the colonial period and the Baroque architecture, as you can see in the collection of its publication, the Revista do Patrimônio Histórico, and a special edition on the Baroque sculptor and architect Antônio Francisco Lisboa, known as Aleijadinho, at the CCA Library. The historiographical constructo elaborated since the 30s by Lúcio Costa is completed with a major assertion in the end of the 40s. The figural relation between the colonial Baroque architecture and modern Brazilian architect, between Aleijadinho here and Lúcio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer, to whom Costa referred as, and I quote, our own national genius that was expressed through the elect personality of this artist, in the same way as it has been expressed in the 80s center under very similar circumstances through the individuality of Antônio Francisco Lisboa or Aleijadinho. This is the Church São Francisco de Assis, done by Aleijadinho, and the Igreja da Pampulha, done by Oscar Niemeyer. The same constructo informed the narrative of the MoMA's exhibition Brazil Built, curated by Philip Goodwin, with the photographs of Kida Smith in 42, also part of the CCA collection. And we have to say that Goodwin consult Lúcio Costa, there is a correspondence between them, and so we understand the same narrative that appear in his exhibition and catalog. Finally, Lúcio Costa Constructo didn't left much space in the architecto-historiographical scenario to major roles played by the immigrant professionals, nurtured in the cosmopolitan and modern European circles who arrived in the country in the interwar period and soon after the Second World War, in the same wave of other European avant-garde representatives spread by the three continents, not only in search of better work opportunities, but pressed by political persecution and the rising of fascism in Europe. In this context, this professional that in our research comprehend architects, urban planners, photographers, designers, as well as artists and modern intellectuals, may represent the permanent exile and the linguistic homelessness of modernity as suggested by George Steiner and depicted by painter Lazare Segal, also immigrant from Lithuanian origins that came to Brazil in the 20s. And this is his masterpiece, the ship of immigrant ships that that he has done in a dialogue with Stefan Zweig, that was in Brazil at the same time. Concealed in some particular histories, but without the pretension of following individual trajectories, as we could not comprehend the vicissitudes of hundreds of professionals who arrived at the Brazilian shores in the period, we will try to show you a picture of the tissue of relations between the individuals and the cultural dynamics. And we begin with the regard of the immigrant who, as suggested by the philosopher George Simmel in 1998, because he has no commitments with the local, the regard of the stranger that, as suggested by Simmel, has no commitments with the local culture, and is much more free in his condition of foreigner to import quality to this space, as well as observe it with less prejudice through more universal and objective lens. This first image will be my cadeau for my new French voisin. Interested, yes, you know, Rudowski in Brazil. This is an image, a painter done by Rudowski in Brazil. We will use another elaboration by the philologist Erich Auerbach about this foreigner regard. He said that the exiled intellectual, he said, I'm sorry, I'm beginning again. As an exiled intellectual, he, from German, Auerbach went to Turkey, and then where he wrote his famous and important Mimesbuch book, and then he went to United States, and he has an elaboration also about the foreigner regard. And he said, the exiled carries the conscience of at least two cultures, and because of this, he may reconcile in an easier way the particular and the universal. Being architect, artists, photographers, or writer, the vicissitudes of the immigrant may represent the encounter with other cultures and the intensification of all the difference. And here some artists and photographers and architects who looked to this country from with his double regard, double look. This is Le Corbusier, the famous photograph done by Claude Lévi-Strauss that looked to São Paulo and said it's a sauvage city and it's very provincial. Another photographer from the German origins, Hans Flick. Peter Schreier, who also began to photograph in Germany. And here is Le Corbusier, a paragraph from the book Précision that recall Corbusier passage to Brazil, South America, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. And Le Corbusier said, Rio de Janeiro, ville qui semble... Est-ce qu'on peut le dire en français?
Bien sûr.
Défier radieusement toute collaboration humaine à sa beauté universellement proclamée, il vous vient un désir violent, fou peut-être, d'ici aussi tenter une aventure humaine, les désirs d'y jouer une partie affirmation, homme contre homme, avec présence, moi je ne peux pas plus rire, présence, nature. Ça veut dire que cet paysage fait que this landscape make the push the architect, this immigrant to work and to act. And this is what Corbusier, design Corbusier has done, his famous design to plan to Rio de Janeiro. But if the passport is the public persona or the mask of the rootless cosmopolitan, it's also a metaphor for the in-between space where these immigrants search to reconcile their differences and exiles. In the interwar period and early in the war, most, I'm sorry, this is, in Brazil at that moment, the dictatorship of Getúlio Vargas has sweetened laws against the immigrant. First of all, for the entrance of immigrants, there was quotas for immigrants. So to get a visa was already an achievement. Then there was laws against the participation of the immigrants in the professional leagues. So the immigrants also had to, they have to naturalize and then inscribe themselves in the syndicates. And the naturalization at that time took something like 10 years. And to be able to enter in the syndicate also. So the paper, the documents is very important. That's why we put this the strong image of Saul Steinberg passport that he knew very well what it represented. And here you see documents of one engineer from Polish origins, his passport, and the series of visas, more than 10 visas, trying to enter in Brazil, trying to receive a visa to enter in the Brazil at that time. This is the case of another architect, Franz Hepp, from German origins, who entered with his, it took him years to get his naturalization, to arrive in Brazil in '46. It took him something like 6 years to get his naturalization, and then he couldn't manage to get his entrance in the syndicate, in the League of Architects. He had already projected many buildings. This is one of his huge, the tall building that he projected in the center of the city. And even with building like that, his wife write a letter to Le Corbusier and ask him, please, can you give a letter to my husband, because he's not being able to get his to manage to enter in the syndicate. So this is one of the case of people that for them it was very difficult to manage to beginning to work. And what they did is beginning to work, having another professional architect, engineer, who could sign for them. Instead, so many of these buildings, if you are looking in the archives to find some project of this or that architect, it's not signed by the architect himself. For example, in this case, the important Edifício Itália building in São Paulo wasn't signed by the architect. Okay. I have a little problem here. Kind of problem. It makes some sounds. Here we have a number of architects from many origins, like have we have mentioned Pilon, Vachartic, that Maristella have just mentioned, an Italian called Giancarlo Palanti. This woman, I think everyone knows her. Bobardi, Lina Bobardi. Maybe here someone knows. This is Rudowski. Here you have Rino Levi, and this one is beginning to be known. It's a Polish guy. Lucian Korngold. Okay, what we do in our study is working with these architects, considering their origins, what we called Landmannschaften. So we look for their affinities, linguistic affinities, being in a national or a continental level. And we work with them with this concept of Landmannschaft, that in fact it's a very old sociological trying to understand through the idea of landmanship from where they came, their background, their interlocutors still in Europe, and which are then their interlocutors in Brazil. How they connect between themselves, how they connect, how architects connect with landscape architects, with artists, with the designer and the entrepreneurs that usually came from the same community of origins, from the same Landmannschaften in the first moment. Then these connections, this interrelation begin to open. But in the first moment, they work in this community of origins. So here we have Renoulev, Vilina, Rudovsky, Varshavsky, that was Russian, as Maristella was talking, but studied in Italy. So we put him, and has the language. So we put him in the same group. Giancarlo Palani and Daniele Calabi that came to Brazil. Lina came afterward in 46, but Giancarlo also came in 46, but Rudovsky came before, in the beginning of the 36, 37, and Calabi also when the racial laws were issued in Italy. So that's how we work on these groups, looking at their works in their country of origins. Bernardo Rudovsky, his connection with Joe Ponti, and then we see here the Fua Villa done by Daniele Calabi already in Brazil with the idea of the internal party. So that's the way we work. Bernardo Rudovsky, the same thing. Giancarlo Palanti. And here with his main entrepreneur, Carlos Maton, a house he has done for him, an industry he has done for Carlos Maton also. His presence in the Triennale di Milano in 38, Milano Verde. So this is our material of analysis. Daniele Calabi's works also in Italy, etc. So this is one of our instrumental of analysis to understand their production in Brazil. The idea of the immigrants professional as mediators, as Moss had already suggested. We see here Gregory Varshavchik that was responsible for the first manifest on modern architecture. What we see is that these professionals, as intermediate agents in Brazil, they resume they resume the behavior that they saw in their country of origin. So Varshavchik began to publish his manifest in the same way the Vanguard was publishing its manifestos. He built his house, his project, built his house, and inaugurate his house as exhibition in the same way that it was done by the European vanguards in Europe. So here is two houses in Rio de Janeiro he has done, and opened these houses with exhibition. Here is Frank Wright visiting the Varshavchik house in Rio de Janeiro, sided by Lúcio Costa, Frank Wright, and Varshavchik. Here is the house in São Paulo, also opened with an exhibition. It was a strategy to divulge modern architecture. In the same way that was done in Europe, an immigrant that came in 31 that arrived in Brazil in 31, Alexandre Aldbeck published a magazine on modern architecture, and a magazine that not only talk about architecture, but talk about art, talk about cinema, talk about propaganda. And his model, even the graphic model, is in Das Neue Frankfurt, that is part of the CCA collection. Alexander Outberg worked in Germany. He was very young, but he studied the Bauhaus and worked with a lot in Germany. This is when we talk about intermediate agendas and mediators, we are talking about also the architects that came, visit, give conference. And this is a magazine that published, the only magazine that published an interview with Le Corbusier when he came to Brazil the first time in 1929. Movimento Brasileiro. We talk about also about the books that Brazilian intellectuals collected and read. And here I pick from the library of Mário de Andrade, one of the most important modern intellectuals in São Paulo. In his library, we found the architecture by André Loussat, vers in architecture, précision, l'esprit nouveau, completely noted with these observations. So this is also an idea, to give you an idea of the circulation of not only of individuals, but the world and the immigrant. Another way of circulation, here's the correspondence that immigrant architects in Brazil, like Varchati, Henrique Minley, Alexander Outberg that we saw, that published this magazine, Base, began to correspond with Gideon, trying to bring the Siam to Brazil, and to make to have a Siam representation in Brazil. The story is not so easy. We always have personal individuals involved. So Varchati was involved, Outberg was involved, Minling was involved, and not always in a very fair play, but just to make you understand that because they have the language, they have the French, they have the English, they have the German, they could communicate, and they have also this cosmopolitan laissez-faire that make easy for them make this contact with the European vanguard. Here's more letters. The creation of the Biennale in São Paulo, that was created by a couple of a Brazilian and an Italian from origins, Conde Matarazzo, who was responsible for the creation of the Biennale. They brought not only artists, but also architects to São Paulo. And here you have, in the first Biennale, Gideon, Mario Pani here, Sakakura here, and two Brazilians, Eduardo Luiz de Mello and Beck, judging the project in the first Biennale. It was in the first Biennale that was decided to give a prize in the next Biennale to create a prize. The first prize to an architect was decided in by the group of Gideon, Pani, Sakakura in Matarazzo House. They decided to create this prize, this first architectural prize, and give it to Gideon. And Matarazzo financed the book that was written by Gideon and about Gropius, and published, and we have it here in the library, in the CCA library, the book about Gropius. Another important initiative of the group of immigrants is the work of the couple, of the Bardi couple, that came to Brazil in '46, invited by Assis Chateaubriand, the director of the Museum of Modern Art in São Paulo, and it needed a director, and it chose Bardi, that came with Lina Bo, and they created a museum in the spirit of a didactic museum. And inside the MASP, Bardi organized not only courses, classes of propaganda, design, photography, sculpture, painted, inviting professors from abroad. But he did is the first exhibition with modern architects and artists from Calder, Le Corbusier, a series of important names in the art and architecture in Brazil. And it was really an important initiative, because generation of Brazilian young people began in MASP, began in the courses of MASP. Even Max Bill was there, etc. Another initiative of done by immigrants in Brazil was the two architectural magazines, the first two architectural magazines, the Acropolis magazine and the Habitat. The Acropolis was edited by Max Grunewald from German origins, and Habitat was directed by Lina and Pietro Maria. These immigrant architects were engaged in all the modern programs that could be that we could imagine. High-rise buildings like Conde Prates, designed by Giancarlo Palanti. This is the building ready. This building was done by Lucian Congold also in the city center of São Paulo. We are talking. This building was done began in '46. Nothing was happening in Europe in this time. So just for you to imagine, this building was the bigger concrete structure in Brazil during many years. It has 30 floors. Also commercial centers like this one, with buildings in different levels. This was done by I'm going first, first, just for you to have the idea of the strongness of this production in those years. This is the siege of journal in Brazil done by Hep. Hep had worked with Corbusier, so you see, this is also from Hep, you see the Corbusian influence, a church by Hep. This is another architect, Rino Levi, that was in fact, he was born in Brazil, but from Italian origins. He went to study in Milan, and then he came to Rome and studied with Piacentini. And some works done by Levi in this period, I'm talking about the 40s, cinemas, garage. And we want to finish with the idea of the dialogue, how all the background of this immigrant can dialogue, could dialogue with the Brazilian culture. And this is just for you two covertures of books written in Yiddish but published in Brazil for this tentative of talking, of dialoguing with the local culture. I'm sorry, I'm coming back. Oops. So, just to make a conclusion, in the face of the industrial growth between the decades of 30 and 50, the immigrant architects faced the urban problems of a developing country with the theoretical instruments elaborated by the European vanguards without its technological content, of course, as has been observed, incorporating the experiences and specific developments of the modern architecture in America, as well as the post-war debates inside this year. They have to deal with a diversity of programs, cinemas, theaters, hospitals, schools, universities, new typologies for commercial and residential buildings and industries, leaving their imprint in the urban landscape. If we could say that the dialogue between the foreign and the national in the space of the city could achieve its effectiveness in the cultural and in particular in the historiographical space, their presence would take almost until the end of the 80s to begin to be fully recognized. The problematic was observed and pointed still in 1967 by Michel Foucault through his heterotopia spatial metaphor, when describing the visitor's bedroom in a traditional colonial main farmhouse in Brazil. The French philosopher wrote, and I quote, "Any traveler had the right to enter the room and spend the night there. Now the rooms were arranged in such a way that anyone could never reach the heart of the family, more than ever a passing visitor, never a true guest." Effectively, Foucault's spatial metaphor was chosen from within the same already mentioned fictive ethnicity space, the colonial space, issued by the modern intellectuals of the 30s in search of a national identity assertion. Under the influence of the Lúcio Costa historiographical model, the Brazilian scholars were still very much reserved about the subject of cultural transference, resenting the schema of the history of influences, through which one culture is submitted to the influence of another through the perspective of the mediators, translators, and a content context in which the receiver culture was mostly considered in a more or less lower position, implying a cultural hierarchy. In the 80s, Michel Spain and Michael Werner introduced the concept of transfer culturel that later on was developed as Histoire-Croisée, amplifying the analytical possibilities of historical process that interact simultaneously on the global and local level, illuminating, and I quote, the synchronic tango of political, economic, intellectual, artistic, and human dynamics involved in the cultural exchange. If the new theoretical apparatus allowed a new wave of studies on the subject of architectural exchanges, from Zidel Bozdogan modeling the nation building Turkish architecture and culture in the early republic, Ezra Akran, Bernd Nicolai works on the exchanges between Germany and Turkey, as well as the European exiles in California, the pioneer work of Vikram Bhatt on English transfers in India, Jean-Louis Cohen on architecture exchange between Germany and France, France and Algeria, United States and Europe, United States and USSR, etc. Tom Havermate on European architects, also North Africa. Caroline Magnac working on transfers between United States and France. Georges Correa, my friend, on photographers on Middle East. So many good scholars and important works. And last but never least, Maristella Cacciato and Stanislaus Podmos searching for Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret in India, the next CCA exhibition. Particularly in Brazil, this new theoretical apparatus endorsed the deconstruction of the old historiographical discourse, opening the path for the recognition of the role played by the immigrant professionals in the forging of a modern cultural landscape in the country. And this is, I finished with an image by the photographer Hans Guter Flieg of the São Paulo in the 50s. If we could go building by building, we'll see that it's all mostly done by immigrants.
I'm wondering, you speak about the dialogue, and I'm not sure if I understood you well, but you gave us examples of all, let's say, the immigrants speaking a rather, let's say, international language, if you look at the picture, because also you say, coming with the, let's say, they bring their background with them. But I wonder, in your opinion, also with, let's say, the introduction that you gave to us, who do you think they talk to in terms of dialogue with, let's say, using their kind of international, modern, how can you say, tools or the way they design, which seems, in a way, not to talk with the local community, but maybe in a way, let's say, talk to a kind of international public. And I ask you this because it's the same experience that I had in Southeast Asia, where similar, let's say, things happened, and which was ironically actually Brazil, who was that the example for a lot of Southeast Asian countries. So I wonder, who do you think they speak with if they design in this way, in terms of dialogue and in the urban space?
Okay, it's a very good and rich question, because it gives us a lot of things to work on. First of all, I think, first of all, you have to remember, I can see it. First of all, we have to remember that live in Europe, in the condition they left, ideal in America was an international, cosmopolitan, and universal ideal. So the modern architecture for them was the instrument of a big, to be able to construct, to build a bigger community, if you can understand. Yeah. So your question is done. I can't say it's anachronistic for them. If I were I'm disembarking in a boat, running from the fire in 1941. This is my ideal. This is what I want. Of course, when we look at their production now, we introduce the question, but where is the dialogue with the local? So in this sense, first there's one etap, and the second is, in fact, there was a second etap. You know, there was a second moment of thinking. And when I show these two covertures of books in Yiddish, I mean that there was this dialogue was introduced. The dialogue, for example, the dialogue with what was going on in Rio de Janeiro, with the Brazilian architecture done by the group, the Carioca group. And it was a very intense dialogue, and you can see with all of them. The dialogue with the Italian, for example, the group from Italian origin, Rini Levi, Lina, especially, but Rino Levi very much. Rino Levi studied in Rome. He had read Giovannini, and he has this background of the how do you call it, the dialogue with the ambience, that for him was very important. The relationship between NATO and the building for Rino Levi was very important. Rino Levi work, I didn't because I was kind of worried, but I didn't show you. Rino Levi was a very good friend of Burle Marx, our landscape architect. So in his works, he always invited Burle Marx to work. I show one house done by Rino Levi in a city, in a city where he did this, project this house, he project the industry for this. It was the owner of this. So there was this dialogue. If you see the first moment, the first houses of Brodowski that are they are Italian houses, but Calabi not stayed long in Brazil, so his houses are very much Italian in this sense. But we can see in the Polish group, in the Italian group, in the German group also. I think this dialogue was very much, even when in the way they implanted you say, the building in the terrain. There was this discussion. Hep, when came to Brazil, he has this regard to the urban condition, to the urban site, very precise. So yes, I think there is the dialogue. The difficulties was the dialogue in another level, the acknowledgement of the immigrant architects in Brazil, I think. But yes, I would say yes. In the end.
In the end. So who is now next? We have Marco Banzini and then Pierre Chabat.
Levi studied in Italy, but he designed deeply Brazilian architectures, I think. I'm impressed by a sort of phenomenon that I see, that it's the opposite of what you described. During the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, many architects coming from Europe came, for example, in the States. But in some way, they maintained their European strong identity, their theoretical identity, their way of design. Speaking of Brazil, I've been always impressed visiting Brazil by the fact that, yes, there was such a huge immigrant crowd of architects coming to Brazil. But in some way, their work became Brazilian. There is a general Brazilian flavor coming from the work of this community of international architects. How happened? Brazilian culture was stronger than that of the States. How happened? The Brazilian identity that could be perceived as so strong, was how happened that such a diverse community of people coming from different countries, coming to Brazil, they became Brazilian.
You are asking me how it's happening?
No, I'm just curious because I have this feeling.
Yes, I agree with you.
For example, yes, Rino Levi studied in Italy,
Yeah.
but if you look at the Rino Levi house that you presented, that's Brazilian. It's clearly Brazilian. It was made for Brazil.
Yeah.
And that's happened more or less. Lina Bobardi. When she came to Brazil, Lina had an experience. She was working with Gio Ponti in Milano. She had worked in the major magazines in Italy. She was not a poor girl coming from a country. But she designed, can you say, in a modern Brazilian way when she arrived in Brazil.
Yeah, Franco, maybe we misunderstand ourselves because I said the Italians unlikely. I think the Italians, Lina, Rino, even Palanti, well, because Palanti designed a lot. He have a lot. He draw a lot, and he designed all the movements because he was a womanizer. But he was really. I think the Italians, because of their background, the idea of vernacular architecture in Italy, the idea of ambience, I think they were more predisposed to this is my feeling, to integrate easily. What Lina did in Salvador, her house, I think I look at it as very Italian because I know from where she came, but you know.
And I look as very Brazilian.
Yeah, she is Brazilian, but the Italian background predisposed this regard on for the local. Maybe this is the.
Pierre, and then.
Just standing,
Yes.
A little question about Widowski. I wonder if you know if his intention was to stay in Brazil and to make his life and career in Brazil, or if Brazil was only a transitory step in an international journey, and because it's important to staying in Brazil was only the short part of his.
Yeah. I know there is another busy scholar that is studying Rudowski, because I know someone asked Kaduka help with me. I don't know who it is, but Pierre, we have already discussed this. I'm not sure, but from what I know, he came to stay. It wasn't easy for him. He went to Rio de Janeiro first. He worked with someone called Heuberger. It was a group of German with a magazine, a boutique of furniture. And from my knowledge, it's something to be worked on, and I don't know if Felix knows more about. He went to the United States because he won this prize at the MoMA with his design of the chair. So, he went in '41. It wasn't. There was no much time to settle, and I think he had 2 or 3 houses already in Brazil. So it wasn't much, but we have to work on this.
We still have Andreas.
Yes.
Oh, okay, and Suzanne. Please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and since I'm doing my PhD on CM, I was really thrilled to see data from CM, and also to understand through your presentation how CM and the modalities of proposing modern architecture, such as the presentation of the new house through an exhibition within the house and so forth, were a way for these immigrant architects to position themselves in the Brazilian scene. And so I'm wondering whether the dialogue occurred not only on the cultural level, that was also represented by modern architecture and the confrontation with the local, but whether it happened also on a very material level, because I think that architecture has this beauty which is matter. It's something which is built and requires a collective work to get it done. And so I'm wondering whether the realization of what is modern architecture in Brazil that you've shown involved local communities of immigrants that came along with these same architects, whether entrepreneurs came along with them, and whether workers, actually construction workers, came along with them, and whether this way of applying strategies of positioning the modern architect in Brazil, which is immigrant architect, was present also in these immigrant communities.
It's also a good question because, in fact, the workers, effectively the workers, were not. It's not the same wave of immigration. In Brazil, what happened is the workers. The first wave of immigration was from the Italian workers came in the second half of the 19th century, and they were the first, the one who began that really had the knowledge of the métier. Still in the 20s and 30s, when I work in the archives, we have these Italian workers that were still building, and they have, because they came before 1930, they came in the end of the 90s and beginning of the 20th century. They didn't pass through all this dictatorship and so on, so they have the license to build and to sign. So they were the building workers. till the 40s. After the 40s, in the 50s, when there was a huge development, economical development and development in the construction, so in that moment, the immigrants from the north of the country came to São Paulo to work in the construction sites. And then it was kind of complicated, and maybe with modern architecture it could be easier. But in terms of techniques, from United States, a lot of patent came from the United States, from glasses from France, steel from the United States, and then in the 40s, Getúlio Vargas, in the end of the 40s, Getúlio Vargas created the first siderurgical, if you remember the garage that I showed down by Rino Levi, was the first steel construction in Brazil, but it was very expensive. There was another building done by Connor, the Polish one, in a steel structure. But then at that moment, 50s, most of the workers came from north of the country, and we felt this less of techniques, and so the project has to be more. There has to be more planning in the building construction. But we never have what we in the United States have. The worker that came, big one, with all these schedules. This is
Tailorism.
The tailorism. Yeah, exactly. We never had tailorism. This began in the last 20, 30 years.
Suzanne?
Thank you for the presentation. I was just very curious to know the image.
Voice.
I was just very curious to know why you chose the image you chose for the presentation, the cover image.
The cover?
We can't hear you. The cover?
Yes, I was curious to know why you chose the
That
image.
is a very good question. Because I was looking for something very special and very rare in the collection, and although I found all the Brazil builds, and that's very important thing I found, modern important thing I found here in the collection, but I thought this was really a book, a rare book, something very, very, very special that deal with Brazil. So I used the image, and I confess, I use it in my discourse because it's a very important book, and it's a very, and it's part of the idea of circulation. It's really part of the idea of circulation.
I don't know all the names. Well, I know that there is a question here. Phyllis? Oh, we have a question over there. Well, and then we'll probably stop after that. Please.
Yes, I'm also intrigued by this idea of dialogue.
We'll talk about it.
I am intrigued by the idea of dialogue because the dialogues did lead to built works and very significant built works. So, and the publications and the role of the publications, how certain architects and certain ideas became known because they were first incarnated into these publications. So then Corbusier, when he was invited to Brazil to speak about his ideas of modern architecture, who was it exactly who invited him to initiate one of these first dialogues?
First of all, about the publication that I couldn't mention in my presentation, but apart from all the initiative of these immigrants as intermediate agents, mediating agents, the role of the immigrants in the divulging the architecture in Brazil, divulging architecture in Brazil through publications, through the international publications is very important. First of all, the first correspondent, Architecture d'aujourd'hui, was, for example, a Polish woman, a Polish architect. All these immigrants, architects from all the origins. And she was she has the French. She was the niece of Bergson. And she knew the French, and she, when she sent reports, articles to blog at the L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui, she sent an article with the project done by the immigrants. What doesn't that would not happen lately when someone else became the representative of the L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui in Brazil, someone from Rio de Janeiro, and from inside the group from the Carioca group. So the connection of Lino in Italy that make that he was published in Italy, his book was published soon in Italy. So the work Giancarlo Palanti published, that was a correspondent of the Casabella, was part of the editorial team of Casabella, also sent articles when he just came, sent articles from Brazil. Rudowski sent articles to Domus also. So there was been, in this sense, they were important part in the in this divulging of Brazilian architecture, Brazilian production to outside. When the first article written by Rudowski was on the Minister of Education, Santé et Education, the MES, done by the group of architects. So, the work of Lina had already all these experiences with Ponti, etc. And in Brazil, she was very important in the divulging through the habitat. And the habitat wasn't only architecture, was art, was culture, was really a cultural magazine. And they have this cosmovision that what it should be a cultural magazine. So this is first part. Second part, which was
Did you give this talk on
Presenté when he came in 29 was invited, in fact, by the Argentinian, what was the name, the famous Argentinian modern promoter.
Was it as simple as that?
Yeah, it was because she knows, of course, he knew some other Brazilians, Paulo Duarte, etc. But the invitation was done by, come on, there was no Argentinian here. She was so famous. She has this magazine also in Buenos Aires. She was really the cultural tycoon in Buenos Aires, and she was who invited him first to Rio de Janeiro, and then for his connection in Brazil, Tarsila do Amaral, a group of Blessendra was in Brazil. Blessendra was a friend of the group of Tarsila, artists, modern artists that study in Paris, Tarsila do Amaral, Anita Malfatti, and then Blessendra, I guess, told him, go, and he came to Brazil. From Buenos Aires, he came to Brazil, he went to Uruguay. So, in fact, it's a network. It's a network.
I see that there is a question over there. If you're willing, and then we'll start.
Sure. I have a question about, I mean, I'm really like, do you mind if I sit or should I stand?
No, I see.
I'm very interested in the story about the role of immigrants in building the Brazilian city. But I'm a cultural historian. I'm more interested in how architecture is a sort of, it helps us understand how a state nation builds, how it builds, you know, a people and a culture, and what it is, I guess, less concretely. And I guess my question is, if through this research you've come to any conclusions about the Brazilian state's ongoing and evolving quest to define what is the Brazilian people, what is Brazilianness, and how the immigrant fits into this. Because it seems to me fascinating that the immigrant plays such an important role at different times, and an ongoing role in building what, you know, this manifestation of Brazil should be, but there's an unspoken tension. They're very present. We saw that last image that you showed, how, you know, you could point out every image where immigrants were involved in designing or building. But you also had images of pleas to outside authorities to grant visas or, you know, permits to join the guilds or, you know, the associations for, you know, credibility and productivity. So I guess my question really is, you know, where do you see the immigrant in this idea of Brazilianness, or the Brazilian? It might be a big question, but I'm very interested in immigration and how it works with defining what's, you know, what nation building you know, results in, the sort of idea of a people. It always changes, but during this period, I think it's fascinating. So many people are on the move, so I just wondered if you came to any conclusions about that. Thank you.
If we can give a quick answer, not because, I mean, this is a huge question about national identity in Brazil.
Yeah.
So we can talk about Indianness and so on.
I guess the fact that there are so many works now are being done in Brazil about the subject is the answer that these buildings are part of our culture, are already part and recognized as part of our city and a part of the culture. I think this is the answer. Just to make it short. You know, when a work as Segal, when a picture of Segal that came from abroad, and Mario de Andrade was the one who I mentioned that has received all this book about Corbusier, Loussa, etc., etc. It was a humanist. He has a European culture, but he was a nationalist. So at a certain moment in the 40s, and he was a friend of Segal, but at a certain moment in the 40s, he said, Segal, this painter that only a Jew can paint like this, so ugly. And showing because Segal has painted his portrait. And it wasn't so bad, so very good look. And he said only a Jew can retire all the ugliness of someone and put it on a portrait. And in this moment, he was reassuring another Brazilian painter, Portinari. So when the Museum of Segal nowadays and all this collection is part of the national heritage and recognize the museum and it's part of our heritage, I think your answer is there. I think your answer is there.